This is David Finzer, broadcasting for the second hour from the Gibraltar of the Balkans, the historic city of Novi Sad, along the banks of the beautiful Danube River here in Serbia. You can join our conversation by calling toll-free in the U.S. and Canada at 1-855-655-2121, or by Skype at ORN Live, or you can email me at david@truthandliesradio.com. According to the U.S. debt clock, the total U.S. national debt is $15,760,223,000,000 and counting, which amounts to a debt per taxpayer of $138,584. The total gross domestic product, which of course is every day growing to be a smaller percentage of the debt, or the debt's getting bigger than the gross domestic product, is $15,191,922,000. About the national debt's about 107, 108% of the GDP. The total U.S. debt, however, when you add everything together, is just a mind-boggling to me, $57,616,396,000,000 and counting at a speed so fast that my eyes can't keep up, which is a total debt per citizen of $183,673. Yep, America is bankrupt, and some of the people who helped get it that way are gathering in Chantilly, Virginia. I'm not a big conspiracy theory guy. In fact, over on Saturday, I had a long discussion with a couple of my friends, because the people in Europe love conspiracy theories. And they were showing me all these World Trade Center things and all these conspiracy arguments. And I said, you know, we really don't have to worry about whether those things were conspiracies or not. The people who oppose us openly say what they're going to do. Just like Hitler, who said he was going to kill the Jews. Just like Lenin, Stalin, Mao, these people brag about it. And so do the Bilderbergers, who are meeting in Chantilly. Now, they're a little more genteel. They dress better. They stay in fancier places. But they made it very clear what they want. They want a world government, which they think they should run. And before I continue to comment on this, I'd like to crank up the Wayback Machine and listen to something Ronald Reagan had to say from the Screwtape Letters, which was a rather famous book written by a Christian lay theologian, C.S. Lewis, who also wrote The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe.
It was C.S. Lewis who, in his unforgettable Screwtape Letters, wrote, "The greatest evil is not done now in those sordid dens of crime that Dickens loved to paint. It is not even done in concentration camps and labor camps. In those we see its final result. But it is conceived and ordered, moved, seconded, carried, and minuted in clear, carpeted, warmed, and well-lighted offices by quiet men with white collars and cut fingernails and smooth-shaven cheeks who do not need to raise their voice."
And something's different happening. Different is happening this time. The Bilderberg Conference of the Elite is receiving unprecedented media scrutiny because activists from across the political spectrum are arguing that U.S. citizens attending this controversial conference are potentially committing a felony, that's right, a felony, by violating the Logan Act. And while the chances of charges being brought anytime soon are probably about the same as hell freezing over, more than a few critics of the meetings are still loudly calling for prosecutors to bring any and all of the perpetrators to justice. This yearly gathering includes media magnates, the giants of industry, the banksters, the most influential politicians, royalty, nobility, the academics, military and intelligence chiefs, and the rest of the self-proclaimed global elite. The 2012 conference is no different. According to a guest list released by the group, which analysts who study Bilderberg say typically omits certain key participants, there are about 50 Americans in attendance, all of them extraordinarily influential. Other participants have come mostly from Europe, though this year, even a high-ranking official from Communist China's ruling dictatorship is in attendance. The legal problem raised by critics is that federal law specifically bars any U.S. citizen without government permission from working with foreign officials on matters of policy. This was first passed under John Adams' administration in 1799, so it's not exactly a new thing. The Logan Act was amended as recently as the 90s, and despite almost never being used, remains in the books today. And many Bilderberg opponents say that means that Americans meeting with foreign officials at this secret gathering should be investigated and potentially prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. The Logan Act states in part, quote, any citizen of the United States, wherever he may be, who without the authority of the United States directly or indirectly commences or carries on any correspondence or intercourse with any foreign government or any officer or agent thereof with intent to influence the measures or conduct of any foreign government or of any officer or agent thereof in relation to any disputes or controversies with the United States, or to defeat the measures of the United States, shall be fined under this title or imprisoned not more than 3 years or both. Well, since these are the Rio Summit people, the eco-Nazi people, the population control people, the world government people, seems to me those are all measures that might be punishable under the Logan Act. A lot of bloggers and activists have suggested that based just on what is already known from public statements, that simply attending a Bilderberg meeting might constitute sufficient grounds for arrest. At least one activist and commentator has already notified police of the potential violation at what he described to law enforcement as the, quote, criminal gathering in Virginia. It was not immediately clear whether authorities looked into the matter. But which way do you want to bet? The United States is supposed to be a republic, a res publica, a rule of law. But these people are above the law. They are the internationalists that run us all. But now, as always, we have to break for a word from our sponsors. But I'll be back in 3.5 minutes. This is David Finzer for Truth and Lies Radio on the Overseas Radio Network. David Finzer for Truth and Lies Radio on the Overseas Radio Network. It goes without saying that the developed countries of North America and Europe and Australia, New Zealand, everybody is suffering from monetary problems that are caused mainly by improper banking practices and stupid government monetary laws. And there are many ways in which human beings have created these means of exchange instead of money. Money is just one of them. Currency, means of payment, money that have worked successfully over long periods of time. There's a way through the discovery of that can be done through a highly marketable commodity. This is the way precious metals gained ascendancy. Another way was through banks that issued short-term, like 90-day bills of exchange and provided banknotes. This was common for many centuries. Another way was through the deposits of goldsmiths at a bank in exchange for certificates of gold that circulate. Governments have created tax certificates, good for creating taxes, for paying taxes, and these have functioned as a means of exchange. We should also remember that there have been many commodities that have been used throughout history as a means of exchange, depending upon the time and the place. This isn't a complete list, but it's enough to prove that private economy is perfectly capable of generating a variety of means of exchange to solve the economic challenge of low-cost exchange without barter. People have tried it through online gold money and things, but the government doesn't like that and seems to find ways to close them down. But it's also enough to suggest that even a creature as stupid as a government can devise a legitimate means of exchange without imposing an illegitimate forced currency as a legal tender. None of these methods can cause an economy to malfunction properly used. None can cause unemployment if it's properly used. None of them is ever, not unless banks or governments broke rules that fundamentally changed the means of exchange into something illegitimate or improper or not fitted to the purpose and to the economizing behavior of human beings. Particularly, some of these improper acts that could destroy these kinds of exchanges are governments taxing freely developed means of exchange so as to disadvantage them. For example, some governments impose a VAT on the purchase of gold. Well, when you add another 18% or 23% on top of gold, that's a disincentive. Governments forcing citizens to use a currency by legal tender restrictions. Argentina, you're not allowed to have dollars. My friend from Argentina today just told me now they've instituted, if you leave the country, you have to tell them why, and you're still not allowed to take dollars out. Banks issuing notes against assets that were not short-term or were not liquid, such as term loans, real estate, stocks, mortgages. Banks using financial leverage, usually excessively, to borrow money to buy illiquid or long-term assets, and mixing this activity with the issuance of notes against short-term self-liquidating bills of exchange. And that's all money is. It's like a check is a bill of exchange. Technically, in law, you could write a check on a T-shirt, and your bank really is supposed to honor it because it's a bill of exchange, assuming you have the money in the account, of course, unless you're the government, in which case you make up the money. Banks rolling over short-term bills and improperly converting them into long-term bills. Governments making their own bonds the basis of issuing banknotes. That's like making your own money. Governments insuring bank deposits when the banks were using the funds to buy speculative assets. Governments setting up special banks with special privileges, like the Fed, making their notes legal tender even though they're backed by nothing. Central banks with the power to bail out bad banks and other bad financial institutions that have purchased bad assets and become insolvent and too big to fail. Governments and central banks that habitually favor the big banks and destroy the little banks. Central banks with the power to purchase government bonds with government-forced means of payment. Governments that seize gold, outlaw gold contracts, and issue money that you can't redeem for anything worthwhile. Governments that issue certificates or bills of credit far in excess of what they can collect in taxes. Governments that prevent or restrict their citizens from buying currency or foreign assets. Central banks with a monopoly on the issue of notes and a concurrent phasing out of notes issued by individual banks. This isn't a complete list, but a lot of them fit the United States, certainly. Here we have the opposite situation. Every one of these improper and illegitimate activities have historically been used. Not only can they cause large economic problems, they have caused such problems. Even prior to the Great Depression, thousands of banks failed in America. This was not because they were unit banks or undiversified. It was because they had invested in long-term illiquid assets, such as farmland and mortgages tied to farmland whose prices declined. They declined because they'd been driven up by World War I and the accompanying excessive creation of means of payment by the central bank, the Fed. During the 20s, the Fed created funds that flowed into stocks financed by loans issued improperly by banks, since stocks are long-term assets. History shows again and again that banks cannot safely issue redeemable banknotes against long-term assets. Indeed, the stock market crash of 1929 triggered bank failures in America and worldwide. The large-scale bank failures in the 30s caused a currency famine, much as in 1893. But the banks in this case did not create a currency of clearinghouse certificates as they had in 1893. The Fed controlled the money base. The result was large-scale deflation and depression. With the private creation of currency by proper means and a proper system of governing law, this could not have happened. Monetary system, what are the results? Stagflation, booms, crashes, unemployment, and very often needless wars. We with other nations, trade interruptions, and excessive volatility of assets and commodity prices. We get resources diverted into efforts to protect against this system. We get failures in accounting. We get excessive frauds and rampant speculation. We get bad investments. We get extremely unhealthy alliances between financial institutions and the governments. I'll continue when we come back. This is David Finzer for Truth and Lies Radio on the Overseas Radio Network. We'll be right back.